Hi, this is Mr. Patch. We're going to be starting to look at the copper sulfate pentahydrate lab. This is a lab in which we verify the formula experimentally of copper plus a hydrated sample, which means it'll have water that's attached to that copper sulfate. So in this lab, what we have to do is we have to get a sample of copper sulfate pentahydrate. I've got that right here. Keep in mind that copper sulfate pentahydrate is irritating to the skin, very irritating to the eyes, and toxic if it gets in your mouth. So don't eat it. Make sure you wear your gloves, make sure you wear your goggles, and so on. I'm going to warm it up, and when I warm it up, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be driving the water away. And when I drive the water away, it's going to get lighter. So all I'm going to be left with at the end is an anhydrous sample, which means it's just the copper sulfate alone, and the water will be gone. The mass that we lose is going to be water. We can figure out the mass we lose and convert it to moles, find out how many moles of water were lost. We can have the remainder of the mass and measure that, and that's going to be simply copper sulfate. And when we compare the copper sulfate to the water masses and the copper sulfate to the water moles, we'll find out the mole ratio, and we'll find out the formula from that. That's basically what we're doing in this lab. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to find out the mass of a clean beaker here. So that's what I'm going to do. Turn on my balance. I'm going to let it cycle through, and I want to find out the mass of the clean and dry beaker. I always hit the 0 before I do it. Wait a second. So I've got the mass over here. I'm going to let you see that mass. And now I'm going to put a few grams of copper sulfate in that. Copper sulfate has kind of a blue color to it. There we go. And at this point, I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it on the Bunsen burner setup. When we warm it up, we want to try to make some observations. And by the way, I'm going to just move it so the copper sulfate is kind of coating the bottom part, so it'll be fairly even in there. It looks like so, the blue on there. And I'm going to light the Bunsen burner. When I light the Bunsen burner, watch what happens around the beaker. You should be able to see some signs of condensation, but it'll only be there for a short time because, of course, you only find condensation on the sides of cool objects. And once the beaker warms up, you won't find condensation on it anymore. So I've just turned on the gas here. It might take a moment for everything to go. Remember, when I'm using the Bunsen burner, what I try to do is I try to open it up. A few circles around over here. And it might take a little while for the gas to kind of come through. I can hear it. There we go. Actually, that was pretty good. Turn it down a little bit. I can, let's see. Let's see if we can see condensation on there. I've got the, and we're just going to leave it on for a little while. It's going to take a little while for this to start changing color. I can see a little bit of condensation on the side of the beaker, but it's hard to see. Actually, it's mainly on the side that's away from the camera, naturally. I'm going to kind of move it over here, and there's a little bit there on the side. You might be able to see a little bit of condensation. Okay, that's not going to last long. Well, class, the copper sulfate sample has been warming up for 10 or 15 minutes here. And if you notice, it has changed from kind of a blue color, to sort of a gray color. If you're still seeing blue around the edges or something like that, keep yours heating up. So the lab paper says, turn off your burner and let it cool down before you weigh it. You should actually have a beaker that's cool enough to pick up by hand and place it on the balance before you proceed to the next step. You don't want to take something that's so hot you can only pick it up with beaker tongs and put something hot like that on the balance. It's got to be cool enough for you to do by hand. So at that point then, we are going to get the mass of our copper sulfate and hydrous copper sulfate without the water. The lab instructions say heat it up again to drive off any last bit of water and weigh it again and see if it still weighs the same as it did the first time you dried it out. That's how you know that it is completely dried out. We have already done that, so we are going to continue on to the next step. So I'm going to turn off the Bunsen burner here, and I'm going to then let it cool down, and I'm going to find the mass of it. Well, it's been a few minutes here since we've turned off the Bunsen burner, so let's check and see how things feel. When I'm doing this, I can hold my hands close here, and I can feel that it's still warm. It's very much like putting your hands near a wood stove or something like that. You don't actually touch it. You can feel the warmth coming off of it. When I think it's getting close to ready, I'll touch it really quickly. By the way, when you're doing this, you should be wearing gloves because other students will be using the lab materials as well, and the lab setup. They're always supposed to wipe it down, but when you're doing it, we have a COVID issue, so you should be wearing gloves for all labs. I'm not doing that because there's no students here at school and haven't been for weeks. So I'm touching this now, and it's not too hot to touch. So I'm going to turn on my balance here, and I'm going to weigh it. It should be lighter than it was before. It should have less mass, because we've lost the mass of the water. So whenever I turn this on, just in case I zero it out, my beaker's got to be cool enough to lift with my hands, and it is. I'm putting it on there. There we go, we have our reading. All right, and that is really all we need for the lab at this point. To dispose of this, just bring your beaker with the sample up to Mr. Patch in the front of the class, and he will dispose of the sample for you. Now you can continue on with the lab paper and your calculations and graphs and your conclusions.